There's a different perspective over here. So on this Shabbat, before the 4th of July celebration for our nation's independence, I want to talk about Alexander Hamilton and Emma Lazarus. Why? Well, let's start with Alexander Hamilton. First, Alexander Hamilton may have been Jewish. Now, I know it sometimes seems that we Jews like to think that everybody famous or important was Jewish, but there is actually a real academic historian who has written a biography of Hamilton, and he sets forth some interesting evidence that Hamilton might actually have been Jewish. He certainly was extremely friendly to Jews at a time when philo-Semitism was not exactly popular. The historian is Andrew Porwancher, and his book was supposed to have been published last year by Harvard University Press. I haven't figured out exactly what happened to the book since it's not listed at Harvard University Press's website, nor is any update given anywhere else I could find. But here is some of what Porwancher said. Hamilton was born around 1755, we're not exactly sure of the year, in the Caribbean island of St. Croix, which was Danish at the time. His mother was Rachel Fawcett. About 10 years before Hamilton was born, Fawcett had been married to a Danish trader named Johann Michael Lavienne. Now that name, Lavienne, is a Sephardic variant of Levine. Lavienne did not claim to be Jewish, but he may well have decided to hide his Jewish identity in order to be accepted in St. Croix society at the time. And Porwancher discovered that, in fact, no other Jews on St. Croix at that time identified themselves as Jews. Marriage between Jews and Christians in St. Croix was forbidden at that time. So if Lavienne was Jewish, Rachel Fawcett would likely have had to be converted to Judaism before they got married. And they had a child together, not Hamilton. But the child was not baptized. Lavienne and Fawcett unfortunately had a terrible marriage. He had accused her of harlotry, and she left him and fled to a nearby island, Nevis, where she met a Scottish nobleman named James Hamilton. And that's how Alexander was born, out of wedlock, while his mother was still legally married to Lavienne. So maybe his mother was Jewish because she had previously converted to Judaism. But wait, there's more. Young Alexander attended a Jewish day school. Yes, you heard that right. He actually attended a Jewish day school in Nevis, an island that was at the time 25% Jewish. It may be that he would not have been admitted to a Christian school, born out of wedlock, and therefore he theoretically could not have been baptized. But Porwancher also discovered that there were in fact many illegitimate children back then who were baptized. In addition, Rachel Lavienne was not buried in a Christian cemetery, but rather on the grounds of her sister's home. So at least Hamilton had a Jewish education as a child, and it is possible that a hidden Jewish identity would explain that. In any case, as we know, Hamilton became a New York lawyer, and he apparently had a number of Jewish clients at a time when that also was not too common. In one of his more important cases, he defended a French Jewish merchant named Louis Le Guin. The other side's lawyer started to impugn Le Guin with the familiar anti-Semitic canards that we all are well aware of, such as being dishonest and lying under oath and so on. In response, Hamilton objected. Why distrust the evidence of the Jews? They once were under the immediate government of God himself, and they were selected as the witnesses of his miracles and charged with the spirit of prophecy. Hamilton won the case, with the largest monetary award in American history at that time. Hamilton's kids also had Jewish friends. Again, not necessarily so common back then, and he fought anti-Semitism in public venues. Graduating from King's College, which later became Columbia University, in 1781, he worked with John Jay to rewrite the college's charter. One thing they did was to abolish the requirement that the school's president had to be Christian. In writing the Federalist Papers, many people know that Hamilton worked with James Madison and John Jay. But Hamilton also enlisted his good friend, Gershom Seixas, to help him write them down. Seixas was the cantor of the famous New York synagogue, Shereth Israel. Seixas was also the first Jew to sit on the board of Columbia University. When George Washington wrote his famous letter to the Jews of Newport, which promised that the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, and goes on to promise that everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid, quoting the prophet Micah, Hamilton seems to have helped Washington draft that letter. As you may know if you watched the play, Hamilton had been a longtime friend, confidant, and former secretary to Washington. The letter was delivered, by the way, to Moses Seixas, the brother of Hamilton's friend Gershom Seixas. Finally, and particularly relevant at this time of year, when the U.S. Constitution had to be ratified in each of the states, Hamilton organized the movement to do so in New York. He arranged a big parade as part of the effort, but when he found out that the scheduled date for the parade fell on the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day in the Jewish calendar, even though less than 1% of the New York residents were Jewish, he had the parade rescheduled for the following day. Next Thursday in our calendar this year, for those not following the Jewish calendar, is the 17th of Tammuz. Hamilton also apparently never went to church, nor did he ever take communion. So Hamilton may well have been Jewish. If not, he was probably the most philo-Semitic member of the founding fathers of this country. Now I want to talk about Emma Lazarus. She was a fourth or fifth generation American. One of her great-great-grandfathers came from Germany. All the rest came from Portugal, but had been living in New York since before the Revolution. Now, get ready for this. Her great-great-grandmother on her mother's side was Grace Seixas Nathan. That's right, Gershom Seixas' sister. But there's more, so just wait. Emma Lazarus, as you may know, wrote the poem called The New Colossus, that is affixed to the base of the Statue of Liberty on the inside of the building. The Statue of Liberty was the brainchild of a Frenchman named Edouard René Levolier in 1875. His original idea was to link the emancipation of the slaves in the United States in 1865 with the values of the French Enlightenment. But why did it take him 10 years to get this idea? 1865 was the emancipation, 1875 is when he commissions this statue. The answer is because France was under the thumb of Napoleon III and the Second French Empire from 1852 to 1870. So the values of the French Enlightenment had to be reestablished with the Third Republic in 1870. And I guess it took him another 5 years after that to get his brainstorm to gift this giant statue to the United States in order to celebrate liberty, enlightening the world. Americans, meanwhile, were not so impressed initially. The deal was the United States had to pay for the pedestal to support the statue. So in order to raise money to build the pedestal, an art exhibit was organized to auction off commissioned pieces of art and treasure. Emma Lazarus was at first not interested in writing a poem for this exhibit, until a friend of hers convinced her that the statue would be of great significance to immigrants sailing into the harbor. Emma Lazarus, who had been a fairly assimilated Jew in early life, became obsessed with the impoverished Russian Jews coming to America after the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881, which led to horrible pogroms against the Jews living there. In fact, 13 years before Theodor Herzl, Lazarus had argued for the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So, when a friend of hers told her that the statue would be a warm and welcoming icon for these poor immigrants, Emma Lazarus took up her pen and wrote this powerful and moving poem. The poem was the first entry read at the exhibit's opening in November 2nd, 1883. It remained associated with the exhibit throughout a publishing catalog until the exhibit closed after the pedestal was fully funded in August of 1885. But then it was forgotten, and it played no role at the opening of the statue in 1886. Meanwhile, Emma Lazarus tragically died in November of 1887 at the young age of 38, most likely from Hodgkin's lymphoma. Then, in 1901, another friend of hers began an effort to memorialize Lazarus and her poem, which succeeded in 1903 when a plaque bearing the text of her poem was put on the inner wall of the pedestal of the statue. And now, the rest of the story. The friend who put Emma Lazarus's poem on the Statue of Liberty, her name was Georgina Schuyler. Now, for those of you who saw the Broadway play, and by the way, it's now live streaming on Disney+, so you get a chance to see it again if you subscribe. The name Schuyler probably sounds familiar. That's because Alexander Hamilton married Elizabeth Schuyler, often called Eliza. Emma Lazarus's friend, Georgina Schuyler, was the great-great-granddaughter of Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton's wife. The descendants of the good friends Alexander Hamilton and Gershom Seixas were also, maybe not so coincidentally, friends. Alexander Hamilton, one of the most important founding fathers of our country, essential interpreter and promoter of the Constitution, founder of the national banking system, right-hand man to George Washington, was, if not himself Jewish, at least a very good friend of the Jews. And as the Broadway play delights to point out, he was born an illegitimate child, an orphan, and a poor refugee. Emma Lazarus was a fourth or fifth generation American, assimilated Jew, who took on the cause of poor Jewish immigrants from Russia. So on this Shabbat, before Independence Day, as we celebrate the birth of our country that Alexander Hamilton played such a vital role in, and we recall the history of so many Jewish immigrants, including the ancestors of just about everybody watching right now, I'd like to read this poem, which has become an inseparable part of the symbolic meaning of the Statue of Liberty. Just a few words of explanation first. The title of the poem is called The New Colossus, and it refers to the original Colossus of Rhodes, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. That statue stood astride the harbor of Rhodes and represented the Greek god Helios. It was erected to commemorate the defense of the city against Cyprus, and it stood about the same height as the Statue of Liberty. The sea-washed sunset gates in the poem refers to the mouths of the Hudson and East Rivers, which are on the west, the sunset side of Brooklyn. The imprisoned lightning in her hand refers to the electric light in the torch, which was at the time a novelty. The air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame refers to New York and Brooklyn, which were at the time separate sister cities when she wrote the poem. And now, the new Colossus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she, with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Shabbat Shalom, and happy 4th of July.